The clatter of plates felt like thunder in Sophia's skull. Every muscle ached, a deep, persistent throb. Beneath the restaurant's expensive chatter, she moved like a ghost, her tray heavy, her smile a fixed mask of polite exhaustion. Another night, serving champagne dreams to people who wouldn't know. Real hunger. Her mind drifted to her grandmother, their cramped apartment. Everything depended on her, on this meager salary, on the tips from men who saw her as little more than a prop in their lavish evenings. Il Padrino, with its crimson velvet banquettes, its glittering chandeliers, and the pervasive aroma of truffle oil and aged Parmesan, was a world away from her own. Here, fortunes were discussed over Chianti, empires built and dismantled between courses of osso buco. Sophia, however, moved through it all as if in a trance, her movements automatic, her mind a dizzying blur of fatigue and calculations. How many tables tonight? How many extra shifts? Could she pick up? Could she afford the new medication her nana needed? Or would she have to stretch the old prescription, praying for a miracle? The weight of the silver tray felt like a physical representation of her burdens, each dish a heavy reminder of the gulf between her reality and the carefree opulence surrounding her. She watched a couple across the room, their laughter echoing a little too loudly. The woman's diamond necklace sparkled under the soft, golden light, catching Sophia's eye like a beacon from another universe. Sophia imagined the cool, smooth feel of the stones against her own skin, a fleeting fantasy that quickly dissolved into the gritty reality of her worn-out uniform and aching feet. Her apartment, a tiny box in a forgotten corner of the city, smelled perpetually of old bread and the faint medicinal tang of her grandmother's ailments. Nana, frail and fading, slept fitfully on the lumpy sofa bed, her once vibrant eyes now clouded with age and pain. Sophia often found her staring blankly at the chipped paint on the ceiling, a silent testament to a life that had become a slow, quiet surrender. It was a life Sophia was determined to fight against, to carve out something better, even if it meant enduring these endless, draining nights. Every penny she earned, every weary step she took, was a step toward a future where Nana could have comfort, where they wouldn't have to choose between food and medicine. The thought was a relentless fire in her gut, burning away the exhaustion, fueling her through the relentless churn of plates and polite smiles. A sudden, sharp silence sliced through the restaurant's usual hum. It wasn't a gradual hush, but an abrupt cessation, as if a conductor had slammed his baton down. Heads turned, conversations died mid-sentence, and even the clinking of silverware seemed to vanish. Sophia, wiping down a vacant table, felt an inexplicable shiver run down her spine before she even saw him. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing down on every patron, every staff member. Then he entered, Don Luciano Moretti. The name itself was a whisper in the city's shadows, a legend carved from fear and respect. He was not a man who merely walked into a room. He commanded it. His presence was a physical force, a tidal wave of authority that swept over Il Padrino, drowning out all other sounds, all other concerns. He was a figure cast from a bygone era, his expensive charcoal suit impeccably tailored, his silver hair slicked back with an old-world elegance. His eyes, dark and piercing, swept over the stunned faces, lingering just long enough on each one to convey a silent message. I am here. You are. Nothing. Behind him, moving with the silent, predatory grace of a shadow, was Enzo, his personal enforcer. Enzo was a mountain of a man, built from muscle and menace, his gaze a cold, flat stare that promised swift, brutal consequences to anyone foolish enough to cross his employer. The restaurant staff, usually bustling with practiced efficiency, froze like statues. Waiters clutched their trays, their faces pale. The maitre d', Marco, a man usually brimming with theatrical confidence, seemed to shrink by several inches, his hands clasped nervously in front of him. A palpable wave of fear, tinged with a strange, almost reverent awe, rippled through the room. Customers who, moments before, had been laughing and celebrating, now sat stiffly, their eyes fixed on the Don, their own small dramas utterly eclipsed by his arrival. No one dared to speak, no one dared to move. It was as if the very air had been sucked out of the room, replaced by the heavy, intoxicating scent. A power. Don Luciano surveyed the silent tableau, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. He moved slowly, deliberately, toward a large, secluded booth near the back, a table usually reserved for the most important, most discreet patrons. Enzo pulled out a chair, and Luciano settled into it, with the easy authority of a king ascending his throne. He didn't need to speak to convey his demands. His mere presence was an order. Marco, finally snapping out of his paralysis, rushed forward, bowing so low his bald spot gleamed under the chandeliers. He stammered something in rapid, deferential Italian, his voice barely a squeak. Luciano merely waved a dismissive hand, his gaze still sweeping the room, finally settling on Sophia. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She tried to avert her eyes, to disappear into the background, but his gaze was a physical tether, pulling her in. Marco, straightening with a nervous gulp, hurried back to the service station, his eyes wide with a desperate urgency. He practically shoved Sophia, his whisper harsh and frantic. "You, Sophia, take their table. Quickly. Don't you dare mess this up." His voice was barely audible, a frantic hiss meant only for her. "He is the Don." The words were a cold splash of water, shocking her system, pulling her out of her tired stupor and into a terrifying, hyper-aware state. The Don, the very mention of his name had sent shivers down the spines of hardened men. And she, Sophia, the exhausted waitress, with dreams of a better life for her Nana, was to serve him. An icy dread spread through her veins, chilling her to the bone. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly. A wave of anxiety, sharp and suffocating, washed over her. This wasn't just another difficult customer. This was a test, a perilous tightrope walk where a single misstep could have unimaginable consequences. Every pair of eyes in the restaurant seemed to be on her now, watching, waiting. She could feel their collective judgment, their silent pity, their morbid curiosity. She took a deep, shaky breath, trying to steady her racing pulse. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished surface of a nearby champagne bucket. Wide, frightened eyes, a pale face framed by wisps of dark hair that had escaped her bun. She looked like a cornered animal. But deep within her, beneath the panic, a flicker of that silent resilience ignited. She had faced harder things, tougher nights, more desperate situations. She had to. For Nana, she reached for a fresh linen napkin, folding it with practiced, if slightly trembling, precision. Her movements became deliberate, each one a conscious act of defiance against the fear threatening to consume her. She picked up a menu, its heavy leather cover feeling strangely insubstantial in her grip. Her mind, usually so consumed with her own struggles, was now hyper-focused, acutely aware of every detail. The hushed whispers from the other tables, the watchful eyes of the other staff, the oppressive silence emanating from Don Luciano's booth. As she began her walk towards his table, the distance felt vast, an insurmountable chasm. Each step was an effort, her legs feeling heavy, almost unwilling to obey. She kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, refusing to meet the stares, refusing to acknowledge the palpable tension that crackled in the air. She could feel the weight of his eyes on her, a physical pressure that seemed to pin her in place. The man radiated power, an almost primal force that seeped into every corner of the opulent dining room. It was the kind of power that didn't need to be flaunted. It was simply there, an inherent part of his being. Enzo, standing sentinel-like behind Luciano, didn't even acknowledge her approach. His eyes scanning the room, always vigilant, always ready. Sophia reached the table, her breath catching in her throat. She stood beside it, her posture as straight as she could manage, her hand clutching the menu so tightly her knuckles were white. She forced a polite smile, a fragile mask over her churning insides. Her voice, when it came, was a little higher than usual, but clear. "Good evening, Don Moretti. Welcome to Il Padrino. Can I get you something to drink while you look over the menu?" She met his gaze for a fleeting moment, a dangerous dance of challenge and subservience. His eyes, dark as obsidian, seemed to bore into her, dissecting her, seeing past her polite facade to the trembling girl beneath. A slow, enigmatic smile spread across his lips, not a warm smile, but one that held a hint of amusement, of something predatory. It didn't reach his eyes. "Venha, ragazza," he said, his voice a low rumble, smooth as aged whiskey. "Aceitarei o seu serviço esta noite." "Come, girl, I will accept your service tonight." His words, spoken in his native tongue, were not a simple acceptance of her offer, but a pronouncement, an almost playful challenge. The glint in his eyes was unmistakable, a spark of mischief, of something far more complex than hunger for food. It was the look of a man about to begin a game, and Sophia, suddenly, chillingly, realized she was to be his unsuspecting pawn. He gestured towards a menu. In her hand, his smile widening slightly, the silent question hanging in the air. "Are you ready to play her on this meager salary, on the tips from men who saw her as little more than a prop in their lavish evenings?" Il Padrino, with its crimson velvet banquettes, its glittering chandeliers, and the pervasive aroma of truffle oil and aged Parmesan, was a world away from her own. Here, fortunes were discussed over Chianti, empires built and dismantled between courses of osso buco. Sophia, however, moved through it all as if in a trance, her movements automatic, her mind a dizzying blur of fatigue and calculations. How many tables tonight? How many extra shifts could she pick up? Could she afford the new medication her nana needed, or would she have to stretch the old prescription, praying for a miracle? The weight of a silver tray felt like a physical representation of her burdens, each dish a heavy reminder of the gulf between her reality and the carefree opulence surrounding her. She watched a couple across the room, their laughter echoing a little too loudly. The woman's diamond necklace sparkled under the soft, golden light, catching Sophia's eye like a beacon from another universe. Sophia imagined the cool, smooth feel of the stones against her own skin, a fleeting fantasy that quickly dissolved into the gritty reality of her worn-out uniform and aching feet. Her apartment, a tiny box in a forgotten corner of the city, smelled perpetually of old bread and the faint, medicinal tang of her grandmother's ailments. Nana, frail and fading, slept fitfully on the lumpy sofa bed, her once vibrant eyes now clouded with age and pain. Sophia often found her staring blankly at the chipped paint on the ceiling, a silent testament to a life that had become a slow, quiet surrender. It was a life Sophia was determined to fight against, to carve out something better, even if it meant enduring these endless, draining nights. Every penny she earned, every weary step she took, was a step towards a future where Nana could have comfort, where they wouldn't have to choose between food and medicine. The thought was a relentless fire in her gut, burning away the exhaustion, fueling her through the relentless churn of plates and polite smiles. She felt the dull ache in her arches, a constant companion that intensified with every passing hour. The low murmur of the restaurant, usually a comforting backdrop, now felt like an oppressive drone, a reminder of the hours stretching before her. She longed for the simple relief of slipping off her uncomfortable shoes, for the cool touch of her pillow against her temple. But such luxuries were distant dreams, pushed aside by the more urgent needs of survival. A sudden, sharp silence sliced through the restaurant's usual hum. It wasn't a gradual hush, but an abrupt cessation, as if a conductor had slammed his baton down. Heads turned, conversations died, mid-sentence, and even the clinking of silverware seemed to vanish. Sophia, wiping down a vacant table, felt an inexplicable shiver run down her spine before she even saw him. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing down on every patron, every staff member. A subtle change in the light, a flicker in the shadows near the entrance, announced his arrival before his form was fully visible. Then he entered, Don Luciano Moretti. The name itself was a whisper in the city's shadows, a legend carved from fear and respect. He was not a man who merely walked into a room, commanded it. His presence was a physical force, a tidal wave of authority that swept over Il Padrino, drowning out all other sounds, all other concerns. The very molecules in the air seemed to rearrange themselves around him, bending to his will. He was a figure cast from a bygone era, his expensive charcoal suit impeccably tailored, the fabric seeming to absorb the light rather than reflect it. His silver hair, meticulously slicked back with an old-world elegance, gleamed faintly under the chandeliers. His eyes, dark and piercing, swept over the stunned faces, lingering just long enough on each one to convey a silent message. I am here. You are nothing. A subtle arrogance in his posture, a casual disdain for the world around him, spoke volumes of his untouchable status. Behind him, moving with the silent, predatory grace of a shadow, was Enzo, his personal enforcer. Enzo was a mountain of a man, built for muscle and menace, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. His gaze was a cold, flat stare that promised swift, brutal consequences to anyone foolish enough to cross his employer. No warmth, no emotion, just an unyielding hardness that spoke of years spent in the darker corners of the city. The restaurant staff, usually bustling with practiced efficiency, froze like statues. Waiters clutched their trays there, faces pale, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fascination. The maitre d', Marco, a man, usually brimming with theatrical confidence, seemed to shrink by several inches, his hands clasped. Nervously in front of him, his usual booming voice reduced to a barely audible gulp. A palpable wave of fear, tinged with a strange, almost reverent awe, rippled through the room. Customers who, moments before had been laughing and celebrating, now sat stiffly, their eyes fixed on the Don, their own small dramas utterly eclipsed by his arrival. No one dared to speak, no one dared to move. It was as if the very air had been sucked out of the room, replaced by the heavy, intoxicating scent of power, an unseen force that pressed down on everyone, demanding silent obedience. The faint clinking of ice in a distant glass, moments before a gentle background noise, now sounded, unervingly loud in the sudden, cavernous quiet. Don Luciano surveyed the silent tableau, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. He moved slowly, deliberately, his footsteps soft yet resonating with authority, towards a large, secluded booth near the back, a table usually reserved for the most important, most discreet patrons, often those with business best kept from prying ears. Enzo, ever watchful, ever efficient, pulled out a chair, and Luciano settled into it with the easy authority of a king ascending his throne, his movements fluid and unhurried. He didn't need to speak to convey his demands. His mere presence was an order, a command that rippled through the stunned silence. Marco, finally snapping out of his paralysis, rushed forward, his face slick with sweat, bowing so low his bald spot gleamed under the chandeliers. He stammered something in rapid, deferential Italian, a string of apologies and assurances, his voice barely a squeak, utterly stripped of its usual bravado. Luciano merely waved a dismissive hand, his gaze still sweeping the room, finally settling on Sophia. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, threatening to burst free. She tried to avert her eyes, to disappear into the background, to become invisible amidst the opulent decor, but his gaze was a physical tether, strong and unyielding, pulling her in. Marco, straightening with a nervous gulp, hurried back to the service station, his eyes wide with a desperate urgency, his movements clumsy in his haste. He practically shoved Sophia, his whisper, harsh and frantic, laced with a potent mix of fear and desperation. "You, Sophia, take their table. Quickly. Don't you dare mess this up, not tonight. He is the Don. The Don." The words were a cold splash of water, shocking her system, pulling her out of her tired stupor and into a terrifying, hyper-aware state. The Don. The very mention of his name had sent shivers down the spines of hardened men, had caused whispers of respect and terror to ripple through every corner of the city. And she, Sophia, the exhausted waitress with dreams of a better life for her Nana, was to serve him. An icy dread spread through her veins, chilling her to the bone, a cold, creeping sensation that settled deep in her gut. Her hands, usually so steady from years of balancing heavy trays, trembled, slightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough for her to feel the tremor deep inside. A wave of anxiety, sharp and suffocating, washed over her, threatening to overwhelm her. This wasn't just another difficult customer. This was a test, a perilous tightrope walk where a single misstep could have unimaginable consequences, consequences that flashed through her mind in vivid, terrifying images. Every pair of eyes in the restaurant seemed to be on her now, watching, waiting for her to stumble, for her to falter. She could feel their collective judgment, their silent pity, their morbid curiosity, all pressing down on her, magnifying the immense pressure. She took a deep, shaky breath, trying to steady her racing pulse, trying to bring some semblance of calm to her frantic mind. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished surface of a nearby champagne bucket. Wide, frightened eyes, a pale face framed by wisps of dark hair that had escaped her bun. She looked like a cornered animal, vulnerable and exposed. But deep within her, beneath the panic, a flicker of that silent resilience ignited a tiny spark of defiance in the face of overwhelming fear. She had faced harder things, tougher nights, more desperate situations. She had, too, for Nana. The thought was a mantra, a silent prayer that resonated in her core. She reached for a fresh linen napkin, folding it with practiced, if slightly trembling, precision. Her movements became deliberate, each one a conscious act of defiance against the fear threatening to consume her, a desperate attempt to regain control. She picked up a menu, its heavy leather cover feeling strangely insubstantial in her grip, a feather-light object under the crushing weight of her anxiety. Her mind, usually so consumed with her own struggles, with the endless calculations of bills and medication, was now hyper-focused, acutely aware of every detail, every sound, every subtle shift. In the atmosphere, the hushed whispers from the other tables, the watchful eyes of the other staff, the oppressive silence emanating from Don Luciano's booth, all of it registered with startling clarity. As she began her walk towards his table, the distance felt vast, an insurmountable chasm stretching before her. Each step was an effort, her legs feeling heavy, almost unwilling to obey, as if moving through thick, unseen water. She kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, refusing to meet the stares that felt like physical touches, refusing to acknowledge the palpable tension that crackled in the air like static electricity. She could feel the weight of his eyes on her, a physical pressure that seemed to pin her in place, to slow her progress, to scrutinize her every hesitant movement. The man radiated power, an almost primal force that seeped into every corner of the opulent dining room, filling the space with his formidable aura. It was the kind of power that didn't need to be flaunted with loud words or grand gestures. It was simply there, an inherent part of his being, as natural as the air he breathed, as ancient as the stones of the city itself. Enzo, standing sentinel-like behind Luciano, didn't even acknowledge her approach, his eyes scanning the room with unwavering intensity. Always vigilant, always ready for any perceived threat. He was a silent, unmoving pillar of menace. Sophia reached the table, her breath catching in her throat, a small gasp she quickly swallowed. She stood beside it, her posture as straight as she could manage, a fragile attempt at professional composure. Her hand clutching the menu so tightly her knuckles were white against her pale skin. She forced a polite smile, a fragile mask over her churning insides, a desperate attempt to appear calm and collected. Her voice, when it came, was a little higher than usual, a slight tremor, underlying the words, but clear, cutting through the heavy silence. Good evening, Don Moretti. Welcome to Il Padrino. Can I get you something to drink while you look over the menu? She met his gaze for a fleeting moment, a dangerous dance of challenge and subservience, a brief, terrifying connection. His eyes, dark as obsidian, seemed to bore into her, dissecting her, seeing past her polite facade to the trembling girl beneath, to the fear she tried so desperately to hide. A slow, enigmatic smile spread across his lips, not a warm smile, but one that held a hint of amusement, of something predatory, something dangerous. It didn't reach his eyes, which remained cold and assessing. Venha, ragazza, he said, his voice a low rumble, smooth as aged whiskey, carrying the weight of command. Aceitarei o seu serviço esta noite. Come, girl, I will accept your service tonight. His words, spoken in his native tongue, were not a simple acceptance of her offer, but a pronouncement, an almost playful challenge, a subtle assertion of dominance. The glint in his eyes was unmistakable, a spark of mischief, of something far more complex than mere hunger for food. It was the look of a man about to begin a game, a calculated, dangerous game, and Sophia, suddenly, chillingly, realized she was to be his unsuspecting pawn. He gestured towards a menu in her hand, his smile widening slightly, the silent question hanging in the air, echoing in her mind. Are you ready to play? He gestured towards a menu in her hand, his smile widening slightly, the silent question hanging in the air, echoing in her mind. Are you ready to play? Sophia's fingers tightened imperceptibly around the laminated menu, her knuckles turning white. Beneath the thin skin, she could feel the prickle of sweat forming on her palms, a cold, clammy sensation that threatened to betray her carefully constructed composure. His smile, though subtle, was a predator's grin, a promise of a game she had no desire to join, yet knew she couldn't refuse. The weight of his gaze was suffocating, a palpable pressure that pinned her in place, making the air around her thick and heavy. She managed a slight nod, a barely perceptible dip of her chin, her eyes fixed on a point just past his shoulder, anywhere but meeting those dark, assessing depths. She could feel the collective tension of the entire table, the silent anticipation of the men seated around him, like vultures waiting for a carcass to be exposed. This wasn't just about ordering food. It was about asserting power, about putting the lowly waitress in her place, a public display for his associates. The silence stretched, taut, and agonizing, broken only by the distant clatter of silverware and the hushed murmur of other diners, sounds that seemed amplified in her ears, yet simultaneously distant, as if she were underwater. Then he spoke. His voice, a low, resonant baritone, filled the space, but this time it was laced with a deliberate, almost theatrical flourish. Mi porti il risotto al nero di seppia, ma assicurati che sia preparato come lo faceva mia nonna a Palermo. Capisci, ragazza? The words cascaded from his lips in a torrent of rapid-fire Italian, a dialect unfamiliar to the standard tourist, rich with regional inflections and complex culinary terms that would trip up even a native speaker not intimately acquainted with Sicilian cuisine. He savored each syllable, his eyes never leaving Sophia's face, watching for any sign of confusion, any flicker of distress. The risotto al nero di seppia was simple enough on its own, a common enough dish, but the qualifier, come lo faceva mia nonna a Palermo, was the trap, the subtle twist designed to expose her. It wasn't just a request for a specific recipe, it was a demand for a memory, an evocation of a deeply personal, almost sacred culinary tradition, something beyond the realm of a restaurant kitchen. His smile returned wider now, a cold, triumphant curve that spoke volumes of his expectation of her failure. He leaned back slightly, a picture of arrogant ease, clearly relishing the spectacle he was creating. The other men at the table exchanged knowing glances, a ripple of suppressed amusement passing between them, their eyes also glued to Sophia, eager witnesses to her impending humiliation. The kitchen staff, she knew, would never understand such an obscure, personal instruction, let alone execute it. It was a setup, pure and simple. A wave of heat flushed through Sophia's cheeks, a mix of indignation and a familiar, tightening fear. She felt the prick of tears at the back of her eyes, a desperate urge to run, to drop the menu and flee the restaurant, to escape the suffocating weight of his scorn. Her mind raced, grappling with the rapid stream of foreign words, each one a tiny barb designed to pierce her composure. She could hear the complex culinary terms, the specific regional nuances of his dialect, a dense tapestry of sound meant to overwhelm and confuse. It was a language she had never formally studied, a dialect, far removed from the simple phrases she'd picked up from colleagues or basic phrasebooks. This was a different beast entirely, a sophisticated weapon wielded with precision. She could feel the blood pounding in her ears, a frantic rhythm that threatened to drown out everything else. Yet, beneath the rising panic, something else began to stir. Her mind, honed by years of navigating the chaotic symphony of a busy restaurant, accustomed to deciphering hurried orders, accents thick and thin, the cacophony of a dozen conversations overlapping, began to process the sounds differently. It wasn't a language barrier, not truly. It was a puzzle, a complex auditory pattern, and her brain, without conscious instruction, began to dissect it. The rapid flow of syllables, the rise and fall of his intonation, the subtle stresses on certain vowels, it all started to coalesce, not into individual words she recognized, but into a rhythmic understanding, a flow of meaning that bypassed her conscious vocabulary. It was like listening to a complex piece of music. She didn't know the notes, but she understood the melody, the underlying emotion, the intent. The humiliation was clear, yes, but so was the challenge, the specific cultural reference, the very core of his request. A strange, almost detached clarity settled over her, pushing the fear to the periphery. She didn't have to know every word. She just had to understand what he was asking, and more importantly, what he meant. It was a fight for respect, a battle of wits she hadn't signed up for, but one she was now inexplicably drawn into. Taking a deep, almost imperceptible breath, Sophia straightened her shoulders. The tremor in her hands had stilled. Her gaze, which had been fixed on the wall behind him, slowly, deliberately rose to meet his. Her voice, when it came, was not the shaky, subservient whisper from earlier. It was firm, clear, surprisingly steady, carrying a quiet authority that seemed to ripple through the tense atmosphere of the table. Certo, Don, e per la nonna, solo il nero più profondo del mare e il riso, che canta sotto i denti. Un vero piatto di famiglia, non è vero? The words, spoken in flawless Italian, flowed effortlessly from her lips, mirroring the exact cadence and regional dialect he had used. It wasn't just an imitation, it was an echo, a resonance that carried the weight of authenticity. She hadn't just understood his words, she had absorbed their very essence, the cultural specificities, the poetic, almost lyrical way he had invoked his grandmother's dish. De nero più profondo del mare was a direct, evocative response to the squid ink, a beautiful, almost poetic promise of its richness. The riso che cantasato, identi, spoke to the perfect al dente texture, a subtle nod to the chef's skill and the diner's enjoyment, implying a deep understanding of what truly made such a dish exceptional. But it was the final phrase, delivered with a subtle, almost imperceptible tilt of her head, her gaze unwavering, that truly landed with the force of an unexpected blow. Un vero piatto di famiglia, non è vero? A true family dish, isn't it? It wasn't just a question, it was a statement, a challenge thrown back. It spoke of shared heritage, of intimate knowledge, of a belonging that he had assumed was exclusively his, a sacred space she had now effortlessly stepped into. It was a phrase not found in cookbooks or tourist guides, but passed down through generations, spoken within the confines of a Sicilian household, a secret handshake of identity. The transformation on Don Luciano's face was instantaneous, a dramatic shift that unfolded in slow motion, captivating everyone at the table. The mocking smile that had played on his lips just moments before evaporated, wiped clean as if by an invisible hand. His eyes, which had been glinting with cruel amusement, went wide, then narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with an intense, disbelieving scrutiny. His jaw, previously relaxed in a posture of arrogant ease, tightened, a muscle jumping almost imperceptibly at his temple. He froze, utterly and completely, his posture rigid, his hands resting motionless on the pristine white tablecloth. It was as if a sudden, unexpected chill had swept through the opulent dining room, leaving him suspended in a moment of profound, unsettling recognition. The subtle cultural nuance in Sophia's reply, the effortless command of his on specific dialect, and particularly that final, knowing phrase, un vero piatto di famiglia, non è vero, had struck him with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just that she understood, it was that she knew. She knew the language, she knew the unspoken code, she knew the very soul of the dish he had so arrogantly used to test her. It implied a connection, a background, a depth of understanding that was utterly impossible, utterly improbable, and yet undeniably present in her confident, perfectly accented words. The air around their table thickened, charged with an electric tension that seemed to hum beneath the surface of the polite restaurant chatter. The other men, who had been poised for Sophia's humiliation, now sat equally stunned, their own expressions mirroring a confused bewilderment as they watched their boss. Luciano's eyes, previously filled with scorn and a predatory glint, now reflected a profound shock, a dawning, unsettling recognition, as if he were staring not at a simple waitress, but at a ghost, a specter from a past he thought he had left far behind. He saw something in her gaze, something familiar and unsettling, a flicker of defiance, mixed with a quiet strength that resonated deeply within him. The silence that followed Sophia's audacious reply was not just heavy. It was absolute, a profound void that seemed to swallow all ambient sound in the restaurant. The clinking of glasses, the murmur of distant conversations, the soft jazz playing almost imperceptibly in the background. All of it faded into an indistinct hum, leaving only the profound, suffocating stillness at Don Luciano's table. He remained utterly motionless, his gaze locked on his Sophia's, piercing, unblinking, as if she were a mirage, a trick of the light, yet undeniably real. His eyes, which had moments ago been a window to his calculated cruelty, now held a complex, unreadable mixture of bewilderment, suspicion, and something akin to a visceral memory stirring within him. He studied her face with an intensity that bordered on accusation, searching, dissecting, as if trying to reconcile the image of the unassuming waitress with the unexpected, deeply personal challenge she had just laid before him. It was as if she had uttered a secret password, one known only to a select few, revealing a hidden connection, a shared history that defied all logic. The other men at the table, sensing the seismic shift in the power dynamic, remained frozen, their forks hovering midair, their wine glasses untouched. Their eyes darted nervously between their boss and Sophia, their faces betraying a mixture of confusion and cautious apprehension. They had expected a show of dominance. Instead, they had witnessed an unexpected, baffling countermove, a silent challenge that hung heavy in the air. Sophia, for her part, met his gaze without flinching, a quiet, almost imperceptible triumph, blooming in her chest, quickly followed by a new, chilling wave of fear. She had won the battle of wits, but at what cost? What had she awakened in this dangerous man? The air thrummed with unspoken questions, with a tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Don Luciano continued to stare, his expression deepening, morphing from shock to a profound, almost haunted recognition, as if he were staring directly into the eyes of a ghost from his distant, tumultuous past, leaving everyone at the table, and indeed, within earshot, suspended in an unbearable, terrifying suspense. Don Luciano remained utterly still, a statue carved from granite, his gaze locked on his Sophia's face. The shock in his eyes, so profound it seemed to have frozen the very air around them. The opulent dining room, moments ago a symphony of hushed conversation and clinking cutlery, had fallen into an abyss of silence, a vacuum where only the frantic beat of Sophia's own heart seemed to echo. His expression, once a mask of calculated power, was now a canvas of raw, unadulterated bewilderment, slowly morphing into something more ancient, more dangerous, a recognition that burrowed deep into Sophia's bones, chilling her to the marrow. It was not merely the shock of an unexpected linguistic triumph, but the unsettling realization that she had somehow, inadvertently, stumbled upon a secret chord within him, a memory or a truth so deeply buried that its sudden resurfacing had rendered the formidable Don Luciano utterly immobile. Sophia felt the quiet triumph she had momentarily savored shrivel and die in her chest, replaced by an icy dread that spread through her veins. Her quick, instinctual retort, delivered with a precision that bespoke generations of linguistic heritage, had been far more than a simple display of fluency. It had struck a deeply personal and perilous nerve in the man who sat before her. She saw in the way. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, now held a haunted, faraway look, as if he were peering into a distant past, a past he clearly believed was long buried. Her carefully constructed facade, the one that allowed her to move through the world unseen, unheard, an anonymous cog in the vast machinery of the city, had just been shattered by a single, perfectly articulated phrase. She had inadvertently pulled back a veil, revealing not only a part of herself she desperately sought to conceal, but also, it seemed, a vulnerability in the Don himself, and that she instinctively knew was a far more dangerous transgression. Around the table, the other men, once engaged in their own conversations, now sat frozen there, movements suspended mid-action, Forks remained poised above half-eaten pasta, wine glasses. Forgotten, their contents shimmering in the dim light. Their eyes, wide with a mixture of confusion and fear, darted between Don Luciano and Sophia, trying to decipher the silent, terrifying drama unfolding before them. They had witnessed their boss's initial attempt to assert dominance, his cruel, linguistic trap, and then the inexplicable, shocking reversal. They had never seen Don Luciano react like this, not in all their years of service. His usual response to any challenge, however subtle, was swift, decisive, and often brutal. But this silent, petrified shock was something entirely new, something that radiated an unsettling power, far more potent than any overt display of anger. Marco, the restaurant manager, hovered anxiously at the periphery, his face a mask of profound apprehension. He had been through countless high-stakes evenings with the Don, seen him negotiate deals, issue threats, and command respect with an effortless authority. But the silence that now enveloped their table was unprecedented, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on every soul in the room, threatening to crack under the immense pressure of unspoken implications. Marco felt a cold sweat prickle his skin, his gaze flicking nervously from Don Luciano's unmoving figure to Sophia's pale, composed face. He knew, with a certainty that churned his stomach, that something profound, something irreversible had just transpired. The seconds stretched into an eternity, each one heavy with the weight of unspoken history and impending revelation. Sophia felt the intense scrutiny of Don Luciano's gaze, a physical pressure that seemed to strip away layers of her carefully constructed anonymity. She fought to keep her breathing even, to prevent any telltale tremor from betraying the rising panic within her. She had to appear calm, unruffled, as if her reply had been nothing more than a simple matter of good service, of understanding a customer's request. But his eyes saw too much, probed too deeply, burning into her as if trying to excavate the very roots of her being. Finally, the silence shattered, not with a roar, but with a whisper of voice so low it was barely audible, yet resonated through the room with the force of thunder. Don Luciano's words, though soft, were edged with a dangerous intensity that made Sophia's breath catch in her throat. The directness of his questions, bypassing the mundane details of the meal altogether, confirmed Sophia's worst fears. This was no longer about a dinner order. This was about her past, her origins, the very essence of her concealed identity. She felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach, but forced herself to meet his gaze, projecting an air of polite, if slightly bewildered, professionalism. It was a half-truth, a carefully constructed lie designed to offer just enough information to satisfy curiosity without revealing anything truly incriminating. Agrigento was a region, not a specific village. An ancient village was a phrase meant to evoke a sense of quaint, rustic charm, far removed from the brutal realities of the world Don Luciano inhabited. She hoped it would be enough that the romanticized image of a grandmother teaching her granddaughter an old dialect would suffice. But as the words left her lips, she knew it was a flimsy shield against the penetrating gaze of the man before her. Luciano's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in a deeper, more unsettling contemplation. He didn't seem satisfied by her evasive answer. If anything, her vagueness only seemed to fuel his suspicion, to sharpen his focus. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, deliberate movement that somehow amplified the tension, his gaze never leaving her face. He was dissecting her, analyzing every flicker of emotion, every subtle nuance in her posture. His questions came relentlessly, each one a precise, surgical probe, tearing at the fabric of her carefully crafted anonymity. Sophia felt a desperate scramble within her mind, try to keep pace, to Craft answers that were just ambiguous enough to escape scrutiny, yet plausible enough not to trigger outright suspicion. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, each beat echoing the growing fear that her carefully guarded past was unraveling before her very eyes. She could feel the sweat beginning to bead on her forehead. Her hands, hidden beneath the menu she still clutched, trembled slightly. "Minha familia els esteo espolhados, Don," she offered, her voice barely a whisper, forcing herself to maintain eye contact, a desperate gambit to project honesty. "Minha avó já faleceu há muitos anos. Eu vim para a cidade em busca de trabalho, como muitos." It was the simplest, most generic story, one that countless immigrants and provincial transplants shared. A narrative of economic necessity, of anonymity in the bustling metropolis. But she knew it sounded thin, unconvincing, especially to a man like Luciano, who built his empire on reading people, on discerning truth from deception. He merely observed her, his expression unreadable, those dark eyes seeming to bore directly into her soul, peeling back the layers of her composure. He was not looking for a simple answer. He was looking for the answer, the one buried beneath her vague words and forced calm. It was as if he held a key, and her every response was merely a lock he was trying to pick. Sophia felt a profound sense of vulnerability, a chilling exposure she hadn't experienced in years. Her secret, the one she had guarded with such ferocity, the very reason she had chosen this life of quiet anonymity, felt dangerously close to being laid bare. The air around them crackled with an unspoken threat, the kind that didn't need words or overt gestures to convey its lethal intent. She knew, with a certainty that terrified her, that her world was about to change irrevocably. Her triumph had been fleeting, a momentary spark against a vast, dark canvas, and now the darkness was consuming everything. The silence returned, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the frantic rhythm of her own breathing, which suddenly seemed impossibly loud in her ears. Then, with a gesture so slow and deliberate it seemed to defy the very laws of time, Don Luciano lifted his hand. His index finger, adorned with a heavy gold signet ring, extended slowly, tracing an arc through the air before coming to rest, pointing directly at the empty chair at his side. The chair, reserved for his closest confidant, his most trusted advisor. His eyes, still dark and probing, met hers, and in their depths, Sophia saw a silent command, one that brooked no refusal, no argument, no escape. "Senti-si, ragazza," he said, his voice dropping another octave, a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through the floor and up in her feet. It was an invitation, yes, but one cloaked in the immutable authority of a man who ruled by fear and absolute power. It was not a request. It was a decree. In that single, terrifying moment, Sophia knew her fate had been sealed. The game had ended, and she had lost, not to a lack of skill, but to an unforeseen, ancient connection that had just pulled her into the heart of a darkness she had spent her entire life trying to outrun. Her breath hitched, her eyes wide with a dawning horror, as she understood the full, chilling implication of his words. She was no longer just a waitress. She was now inextricably bound to Don Luciano, and to whatever dangerous past he had just unearthed. The world tilted on its axis, the air growing thick and heavy, each breath a struggle against the crushing weight of unspoken fear. Sophia's gaze remained locked with Don Luciano's, his command, echoing in the sudden, absolute silence of the opulent dining room. Her body, however, refused to obey the silent decree of her mind, which screamed for escape, for flight, for anything but this inevitable surrender. But the Don was not a man one refused. His presence was a gravitational pull, dragging her closer into the very orbit of his dark, dangerous universe. Each step felt like a betrayal, of the life she had painstakingly built, a concession to the past she had desperately tried to bury. Beneath layers of anonymity and hard work, she moved, a puppet on unseen strings, her legs stiff, her back rigid. The polished marble floor seemed to stretch for miles between her and the empty chair, each footfall a deafening drumbeat in her own ears. Every eye in the room, she felt, was a laser boring into her, dissecting her, trying to uncover the secret she guarded so fiercely. She could almost feel the heat of their scrutiny, the collective curiosity and suspicion, as the lowly waitress was summoned to the Don's side. The scent of roasted garlic and rich tomato sauce, which had moments ago seemed comforting, now clung to the air like a noxious fume, mingling with the heavy, expensive cologne emanating from Dawn. Luciano, a scent of power and danger that threatened to suffocate her. Finally, she reached the table, the chair pulling back with an unervingly soft scrape as one of Luciano's men, a hulking shadow she hadn't noticed before, offered it to her with a curt nod. She slid onto the plush velvet seat, the fabric cool against her skin, and for a fleeting second she imagined it was a trap, ready to swallow her whole. She felt small, insignificant, yet terrifyingly exposed, perched on the precipice of a revelation that could shatter her world. Luciano sat directly to her left, his elbow resting on the table, his hand delicately holding a crystal glass of dark red wine. He didn't speak immediately, allowing the silence to stretch, to coil around them like a snake, tightening its grip with every passing second. His eyes, though, never left her. They were like obsidian chips, reflecting nothing, revealing everything, boring into her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "So, Sophia," he began, his voice a low, gravelly murmur that seemed to vibrate through the very wood of the table. "Tell me, what brings a young woman of your particular qualities to a place like this?" He gestured vaguely around the restaurant, a dismissive flick of his wrist. It wasn't a question of genuine curiosity, she knew. It was a probe, a test, a calculated effort to peel back the layers she had so carefully constructed. His gaze held a calculating glint, assessing her, weighing her, dissecting her very essence. He was searching, she realized, for something specific, something she could not afford for him to find. Her mind raced, a frantic hamster on a wheel, spinning through 1,000 potential answers, discarding most of them as too risky, too revealing. She needed something simple, something believable, something that would satisfy his superficial curiosity without giving him any real ammunition. Her past, her true lineage, was a ghost she had spent 2 decades outrunning, and she wouldn't let it catch her now. I needed work, Dawn," she said, her voice a little breathy, but she forced herself to meet his gaze, projecting a fragile defiance she didn't truly feel. "My family, they need looking after. This job, it pays the bills." He took a slow sip of his wine, his eyes still fixed on her, assessing the truth behind her words. "Family," he mused, the single word hanging in the air, weighted with unspoken meaning. "A noble sentiment, but a young woman with your talent." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping. "Shouldn't be serving. There are other paths, Sophia. Paths more interesting." The way he lingered on interesting sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't an offer. It was a veiled warning, a subtle suggestion that he knew she was capable of more, and perhaps had been more. He was testing her, pushing at the edges of her fabricated reality, trying to see where it would bend or break. "I just want to take care of my family, Dawn," she reiterated, her voice firmer this time, a small spark of defiance igniting within her. "It's all that matters to me." She kept her story deliberately vague, devoid of any specific details that could be cross-referenced, any names or places that could lead him down the path to her true identity. She imagined a simple, hardworking life, the kind of life countless immigrant families lived, struggling but honest. No mention of the old family name, no hint of the dark legacy that clung to it like a shadow. She spoke of humble aspirations, of a desire for stability and peace, things utterly alien to the world Don Luciano inhabited. She was a simple waitress, nothing more, nothing less. She had to be. A subtle smile, barely a twitch of his lips, played on Luciano's face, a ghost of amusement that didn't quite reach his eyes. Of course, he murmured, a sound like sandpaper on old wood. Family, and certain flavors, once tasted, are never forgotten, are they? Like certain lineages that refuse to die, no matter how much one tries to bury them. The words were delivered with a casual air, yet they struck her like a physical blow. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird, trapped in a cage. He knew, or at least he suspected. The casualness of his tone made it all the more terrifying, a veiled threat disguised as a philosophical musing. Her carefully constructed facade felt like it was crumbling piece by agonizing piece under the relentless pressure of his gaze. Just then, the waiters, moving with synchronized precision, began serving the main course. Platter after platter of exquisitely prepared Italian dishes appeared. Glistening osso buco, steaming risotto, alla milanese, delicate andma pasta tossed in rich, aromatic sauce. The air filled with a symphony of delicious scents, but Sophia could only smell fear. A plate was placed before her, a generous portion of linguine à la vongole, its clams perfectly plump, the sauce of vibrant green with fresh parsley. She stared at it, the food suddenly unappetizing, heavy like lead in her stomach. How could she eat, knowing she was a mere morsel in this lion's den? Her throat felt tight, constricted, making swallowing an impossible task. She was a rabbit caught in the gaze of a predator, and the meal, ironically, felt like her last supper. Luciano, however, ate with a slow, deliberate relish, savoring each bite, his movements unhurried, almost serene. Between mouthfuls, he continued his subtle interrogation, his questions weaving around her like tendrils of smoke, searching for cracks in her armor. He asked about her dreams, her aspirations beyond the restaurant, her opinions on the city, on life, on loyalty. Each query was designed to probe, to test, to find a weakness, a tell, a slip of the tongue that would betray her. He spoke of the importance of roots, of tradition, of the unbreakable bonds of blood, all while his eyes, dark and knowing, never truly left hers. He never directly accused her, never explicitly stated his suspicions, but the subtext was thick, suffocating. He understood that some truths were more powerfully conveyed through insinuation than declaration. Sophia picked at her pasta, twirling a single strand around her fork, but she couldn't bring herself to lift it to her mouth. Her stomach churned, a knot of dread tightening with every passing minute. She felt like a specimen under a microscope, every nerve ending exposed, every thought scrutinized. She offered vague, non-committal answers, keeping her responses short, polite, and as uninformative as possible. She spoke of her appreciation for the opportunity at the restaurant, of her desire for a quiet life, of the simple joy of working hard. She was a blank slate, she hoped, an empty canvas that offered no clues to the masterpiece hidden beneath. Yet, she could feel his eyes on her, a persistent, unwavering wait. He was watching for her reactions, for the flicker in her gaze, the involuntary tremor in her hands, the slight pause before an answer that would betray her true feelings. The tension in the air was so thick, she felt she could cut it with a knife. The other men at the table, his trusted lieutenants, ate in silence, their eyes occasionally darting between their boss and the unexpected guest, their expressions unreadable. They were shadows, extensions of Luciano's will, and their silence was as intimidating as their leader's low voice. Sophia fought against the rising tide of panic, forcing herself to breathe slowly, deeply, to maintain an outward composure that belied the frantic drumming of her heart. She had to be strong, had to protect her secret, not just for herself, but for the fragile new life she had built, for the family she claimed to protect. This was more than a job. It was her very existence on the line. The meal seemed to stretch into an eternity. Luciano finally pushed his plate away, a half-eaten portion still on it, though he had clearly enjoyed what he did consume. He wiped his mouth, delicately with a linen napkin, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. His dark eyes, which had been observing her with such unnerving intensity throughout the meal, now seemed to harden, further becoming glacial. He leaned back in a chair, surveying her with an air of absolute authority, a man who held all the cards, who knew exactly what he wanted. "Sophia," he said, his voice now devoid of any pretense of casual conversation, stripped bare to a cold, unwavering command. "I have a proposition for you." His lips curved into a smile that was not warm, not inviting, but chillingly pragmatic. It was a smile that promised both opportunity and entrapment. "You will no longer work as a waitress here. From tomorrow, you will work for me. Directly. There are many ways a woman of your unique background can be useful, and I assure you, the compensation will be far more significant than whatever meager tips you collect here." It was presented as an offer, a generous promotion, but in the depths of his unwavering gaze, Sophia saw the immutable truth. It was not an invitation. It was a decree, an order that bound her body and soul to his world, to the darkness she had spent her life fleeing. The trap had sprung, and she was irrevocably caught. Sophia felt the words from Luciano like an invisible chain tightening around her throat, each syllable a link forged in steel. The air in the opulent dining room, already thick with the scent of garlic and expensive wine, suddenly felt too heavy to breathe. Her hands, which had been resting on the pristine tablecloth, trembled ever so slightly, a tremor she fought desperately to suppress. Her gaze, which had been locked onto his, now involuntarily flickered around the room, as if searching for an escape route that did not exist. Every polished surface, every glimmer of crystal, every hushed conversation from the other patrons seemed to mock her with their normalcy. This was not normal. Nothing about this moment, nothing about this man was normal. He watched her, those dark, fathomless eyes unblinking, assessing her reaction with the precision of a scientist observing an experiment. There was no impatience in his stillness, only an absolute certainty that she would comply, that he always got what he wanted. The silence stretched, a suffocating blanket woven from unspoken threats and unyielding power. Sophia's mind raced, a frantic hummingbird trapped in a cage, flitting from one terrifying scenario to the next. Refusal was not an option. She knew that with a cold, terrifying certainty. The subtle shift in his posture, the slight tightening around his mouth, the almost imperceptible narrowing of his eyes, all screamed danger louder than any shouted threat. She understood, in that primal, visceral way that bypassed logic, that to say no to Don Luciano would be to invite a storm of unimaginable consequences, not just for herself, but for everyone she held dear. Her grandmother, frail and dependent, flashed before her eyes. The tiny apartment, the struggling restaurant, all vulnerable, all within his reach. Luciano, sensing her internal turmoil, allowed a faint, almost pitying smile to touch his lips. He leaned forward again, his voice dropping to a low, silken murmur, a predator soothing its prey. Before the final strike, "You have a gift, Sophia," he said, the words slipping like oil into her ears. "Deceptively smooth. A gift I can use. Your intellect, your understanding of culture, your command of language, they are rare, valuable. You would not be waiting tables. You would be a cultural consultant, perhaps, or a personal assistant, managing certain delicate matters that require discretion and intelligence. And in return, your problems will disappear. All of them. Financial, worries, medical bills, the struggles that plague so many in your position, they will become a distant memory. The words, though laced with menace, were also a siren song, a dazzling mirage shimmering in her desert of despair. Her grandmother's fading health, the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen table, the constant gnawing anxiety that had become her shadow, all of it could vanish. Just like that. The sheer weight of that possibility, the sudden, intoxicating glimmer of relief, made her lightheaded. For years, she had carried the burden of her family on her slender shoulders, a weight that had grown heavier with each passing day. To have it lifted, to breathe freely for the first time in what felt like forever, it was almost too much to comprehend. The image of her grandmother, smiling and worry-free, blossomed in her mind, a powerful, irresistible temptation. But beneath the allure, a cold dread coiled in her gut. She knew the stories. Everyone in the city knew the stories. Don Luciano's benevolence was a gilded cage, his generosity a golden leash. Once you accepted his help, you belonged to him. Body, mind, and soul. There was no quitting, no walking away. His world was a labyrinth of shadows and secrets, violence and ruthless ambition. A place where loyalty was exacted with blood and betrayal was punished with oblivion. Was the price of her grandmother's comfort her own damnation? Was she truly willing to sell her soul for solvency? Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and desperate hope. The conflict was tearing her apart, each side pulling with equal, agonizing force. One path led to continued struggle, but perhaps, eventually, freedom. The other led to immediate relief, but an unknown future, bound to a man who saw her as nothing more than a useful tool. Luciano watched her face, reading every flicker of emotion, every subtle shift in her posture. He knew precisely where her vulnerabilities lay, where the hooks would sink deepest. He leaned back, again his gaze never leaving hers, and his voice dropped to an even lower register, imbued with a chilling undercurrent of steel. I understand this is a lot to take in, Sophia. Decisions of this magnitude often are, but time, as they say, waits for no one, and opportunities, especially those that can transform a life so completely, do not present themselves often, or linger indefinitely. It would be unfortunate, for example, if certain protections were suddenly withdrawn, if the cost of living in this city, for some, were to become unexpectedly unmanageable, or if an elderly relative suddenly found themselves without the care they require. Life, after all, can be very unpredictable, especially for those who choose unwisely. It wasn't a threat, not in so many words. It was far more insidious, far more effective. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the quiet authority of a man who controlled the very fabric of her existence. He didn't need to raise his voice or brandish a weapon. His power was omnipresent, an invisible shroud that enveloped her, suffocating any remaining flicker of resistance. Sophia felt a cold wave wash over her, a terrible certainty settling deep in her bones. There was no choice. Not really. Only an illusion of one. The desperation for her grandmother's safety, for an end to the crushing weight of poverty, eclipsed all other fears. A bitter taste filled her mouth, the taste of surrender, of a life irrevocably altered. She took a slow, deep breath, trying to steady the frantic pounding of her heart, trying to find a sliver of strength, a shard of her former self, in the wreckage of her hopes. Her voice, when it finally emerged, was a mere whisper, thick with a mixture of fear and reluctant resolve. I accept, she said, the words feeling foreign and heavy on her tongue. It was a capitulation, a signing away of her future, but even in that moment of profound defeat, A spark of defiance flickered. She would not go down without a fight, not entirely. She would salvage what she could, protect what truly mattered. Luciano's lips curved into that almost imperceptible smile again, a flicker of triumph in his dark eyes. He had expected nothing less. But before he could speak, Sophia pushed forward, her gaze hardening, her voice gaining a surprising new firmness, a steel she hadn't known she possessed. "But I have a condition," she stated, the audacity of the words hanging in the air like a challenge. The restaurant around them, with its soft clinking of cutlery and murmured conversations, seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them in a tense, silent tableau. She felt a jolt of fear, a wave of cold, sweat prickling her skin, but she held his gaze, refusing to back down. This at least she could demand. This she had to protect. "My grandmother," Sophia continued, her voice stronger now, resonating with an unwavering conviction. "She cannot be touched. Nothing about her or my family can ever reach your business. She lives a simple life. She knows nothing of your world. She must remain completely outside of it, untouched, uninvolved." The words tumbled out, a desperate plea and a firm demand, a line drawn in the sand, however fragile. She was offering her own life, her own freedom, but her family was inviolable. They were the one thing she could not sacrifice. Luciano listened, his expression unreadable, a slight tilt to his head as he considered her words. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, and Sophia felt her blood run cold, convinced she had overstepped, that her defiance would be met with swift, brutal retribution. But then a subtle shift. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but a softening, a hint of something almost akin to respect in his eyes. It was fleeting, barely there, but she saw it. "Famiglia e sacra, Sophia," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble, a surprising echo of her own sentiment. "Family is sacred. I understand that perfectly. Your grandmother, your family, will remain untouched. Consider it part of our arrangement." The weight of his acceptance, though reassuring in its promise, was also terrifying in its finality. The deal was struck. A lifetime of fear, a lifetime of struggle, traded for a new kind of servitude, a new kind of danger. Sophia felt a profound exhaustion settle over her, a weariness that went bone deep, reaching into the very core of her being. She had saved her grandmother, perhaps, but what had she done to herself? The meal was concluded, the silent agreement sealed. Luciano rose, and with a curt nod that dismissed her, he walked away, his presence lingering like a chill in the air. Sophia watched him go, a figure of implacable power disappearing into the throng of the restaurant. Her legs felt like lead as she slowly made her way to the employee entrance, the mundane sounds of the kitchen now seeming impossibly distant, alien. The world outside, the familiar bustling street, the city lights, all seemed to have taken on a new, sinister hue. Her life, the quiet, predictable, struggling life she had known, was over. A new chapter had begun, one written in shadows and bound by unspoken vows. She had walked into the lion's den, and now she was part of its pride, forever marked. The dark world of Don Luciano now awaited her, and there was no turning back. Sophia's world, once a simple tapestry of shifts at the restaurant and quiet evenings with her grandmother, now violently bifurcated. By day, she moved through the familiar chaos of clattering plates and shouted orders, her hands expertly carrying trays, her smile a practiced mask for the churning anxiety beneath. The scent of garlic and simmering tomato sauce clung to her uniform, a comforting if mundane anchor. She greeted regulars, served tourists, and exchanged tired pleasantries with her co-workers, each interaction a fragile thread connecting her to the life she was rapidly losing. But when the afternoon light began to wane, a different kind of shadow stretched over her, signaling the approach of her other existence. A sleek black sedan, always a different model, always impeccably clean, would glide to the curb. Outside the restaurant's rear entrance, a silent predator in the urban jungle. The tinted windows revealed nothing, yet she knew. A subtle nod from Enzo, or sometimes another one of Luciano's. Quiet, watchful men was her cue. She would slip in the back seat, the plush leather cool against her skin, the air thick with an expensive, unfamiliar scent. Not sandalwood, but something darker. More metallic, like power and old money. The ride was always silent, the city lights blurring into streaks as they navigated through unfamiliar districts, past grander buildings, towering and each journey felt like a descent into a deeper layer of the city, a place where the rules she knew no longer applied. Her evenings were spent in offices of unimaginable opulence, far removed from the humble backroom of the restaurant. High above the bustling streets, Luciano's domain was a realm of hushed tones, polished mahogany, and the faint aroma of expensive cigars. She sat at a heavy, antique desk, surrounded by towering bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes she suspected were rarely read. Her tasks were deceptively simple at first, organizing stacks of meticulously labeled files, digitizing old records, translating obscure documents written in archaic Italian. But even these mundane duties were fraught with a subtle tension. Every paper she touched, every name she read, felt like a brush with a hidden truth, a secret she wasn't meant to uncover. She was a ghost, in a machine, observing, absorbing, her mind a sponge for every detail. The low murmur of conversations from Luciano's inner sanctum, the curt commands given to his lieutenants, the way men entered and exited with deferential bows. Every gesture, every intonation was a lesson in the intricate dance of power. She watched Enzo, Luciano's right hand, a man whose quiet efficiency masked a chilling ruthlessness. She saw the hierarchy in action, the unspoken codes that governed every interaction. A glance, a subtle shift in posture, a specific phrase. These were the true currency of Luciano's world. The dangers were omnipresent, a palpable weight in the air, a constant hum beneath the surface of their controlled calm. She saw the way men carried themselves, the bulge beneath a suit jacket, the quick, assessing eyes that missed nothing. She began to understand that in this world, vulnerability was a luxury no one could afford, and trust was a rare, dangerous commodity. Her own survival depended on her ability to blend, to be invisible, yet intensely aware. She cultivated a serene expression, a blank canvas that betrayed none of her racing thoughts or gnawing fear. Inside, however, her mind was a whirlwind, piecing together fragments, building a mental map of this labyrinthine organization. A strange, unsettling dynamic began to form between Sophia and Luciano. He would appear in the doorway of her makeshift office, a silent specter, his presence filling the room with an almost physical weight. He would watch her for long moments, his dark eyes like obsidian, seemingly probing her very soul. Sometimes, he would pose a question seemingly innocuous about a document she was organizing or a historical detail she might have encountered. Other times, he would simply test her, presenting her with a complex set of financial ledgers and asking her to identify discrepancies or a cryptic letter and demanding its true meaning. Her quick mind, honed by years of navigating difficult situations and a natural aptitude for languages, proved to be an unexpected asset. She found herself thriving under the intellectual challenge, the satisfaction of solving a puzzle, even one steeped in such danger. He rarely offered praise, but his gaze would linger a moment longer, a subtle acknowledgement she came to recognize as approval. One evening, after she had correctly deciphered a convoluted coded message hidden within a seemingly innocent business report, Luciano had stood before her desk, a faint, almost imperceptible curve to his lips. "In our world, Sophia," he said, his voice a low, gravelly timbre that vibrated through the quiet room. "Words carry weight. You're learning fast." The words were a double-edged sword, a compliment that also served as a stark reminder of the peril she was in, of the very real consequences of misunderstanding or misinterpreting the weight of those words. Yet, a dangerous spark ignited within her. Beyond the fear, beyond the disorientation, a potent curiosity began to bloom. She found herself drawn, against her will, to the intricate web Luciano wove, to the sheer, raw power he commanded. She wanted to understand the man behind the impenetrable facade, the mind that orchestrated such a vast and shadowy empire. She began to see glimmers of something more than just ruthless ambition, a sharp intellect, a calculating pragmatism, even a strange, twisted sense of loyalty to his own. The days blurred into weeks, a relentless cycle of the mundane and the terrifying. Sophia became adept at code switching, her mind seamlessly transitioning from the cheerful waitress to the sharp, observant assistant. Her fear remained a constant companion, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now laced with an undeniable, almost addictive thrill. She was adapting, evolving, becoming someone new in the crucible of Luciano's world. One night, after a particularly tense meeting in which he had silently translated a crucial document for Luciano, Enzo, his face etched with a rare hint of relief, approached her. He spoke quietly, his voice a low warning. "The Don trusts you, Sophia. Don't disappoint him." It was a reminder of the precariousness of her position, the razors, as she walked, but it was also an affirmation, a recognition that she had earned a place, however temporary, however dangerous, in their inner circle. The words resonated with a strange pride within her, a testament to her unexpected resilience. Her evenings continued, each one a step deeper into the labyrinth. Sometimes Luciano would task her with organizing the vast archives, a dusty, almost forgotten wing of one of his many properties. It was a place of forgotten secrets, of boxes overflowing with yellowed papers, ledgers, and photographs from decades past. One particularly quiet night, the only sound the rustle of old paper. In the distant hum of the city, Sophia was meticulously sifting through a wooden chest filled with documents dating back to the 1950s. She was looking for specific property deeds, a task that required her to examine each item with care. Her fingers, stained with the fine dust of history, brushed against a small, intricately carved silver locket tucked away beneath a stack of faded newspaper clippings. It was unlike anything else in the box, too delicate, too personal for the cold, hard business of Luciano's enterprise. She picked it up, her thumb tracing the delicate filigree. It was cool to the touch and, surprisingly, heavy. With a gentle click, it sprang open, revealing two tiny, oval photographs. One showed a stern-faced man in an old-fashioned suit, his eyes piercing even through the faded sepia tones. The other, however, made her heart leap into her throat. It was a woman, young and vibrant, with a cascade of dark, curly hair and eyes that held a mischievous sparkle. A gasp escaped Sophia's lips, a soft, involuntary sound in the silent room. The woman's smile, the shape of her nose, the very curve of her chin, it was undeniably, strikingly familiar. A wave of dizziness washed over her, a sudden, powerful connection to a ghost from her past. This woman, this vibrant, laughing woman in the faded photograph, bore an uncanny resemblance to her own grandmother, not as Sophia knew her now, but as she had seen her in sparse, treasured old pictures. The same high cheekbones, the same defiant tilt of the head. It was more than a resemblance. It was almost a mirror image. A shiver ran down Sophia's spine, a cold premonition, mixed with a burning spark of recognition. Her grandmother had told her stories, fragmented tales, of a life before Sophia, a life lived in Italy, filled with hardship and secrets of a family she rarely spoke of. She had mentioned an uncle, a mysterious figure who had gone to America and never returned, a name whispered with a mixture of reverence and regret. Could this locket, this photograph, be connected to that whispered past, to the family her grandmother had left behind, perhaps even fled from? The implications were staggering, terrifying. The quiet, ordinary past she thought she understood was suddenly intertwined with the dark, dangerous present she now inhabited. The locket felt heavy in her palm, a tangible link, an echo of a history she thought was safely buried. This was not just a document. It was a fragment of her own forgotten lineage, a piece of a puzzle she never knew existed, now laid bare in the heart of Don Luciano's empire. Her search for answers, for understanding in this new, terrifying world had just intensified, taking on a deeply personal, chilling dimension. The locket felt heavy in her palm, a tangible link, an echo of a history she thought was safely buried. This was not just a document. It was a fragment of her own forgotten lineage, a piece of a puzzle she never knew existed, now laid bare in the heart of Don Luciano's empire. Her search for answers, for understanding in this new, terrifying world had just intensified, taking on a deeply personal, chilling dimension. Sophia's fingers trembled slightly as she traced the cold metal of the locket. It was old, aged with the kind of patina that only time and countless touches could bestow, yet its intricate engravings remained sharp, speaking of a craftsmanship from a bygone era. She opened it again, her gaze falling upon the faded sepia photograph, the woman's eyes staring back at her with an unnerving familiarity. The resemblance to her grandmother, particularly the one in the few cherished photographs from her youth, was undeniable. Not merely a passing similarity, but an almost identical cast of features: the curve of the cheekbone, the delicate line of the jaw, the proud, almost defiant set of the lips. Her grandmother, a woman of quiet strength and carefully guarded secrets, had always been reticent about her past, especially her early life in Italy. Fragments, whispers had occasionally escaped her lips during Sophia's childhood, tales of a family lost to the winds of change, of a brother, an uncle who had journeyed to America and disappeared into the vast unknown. A name, too, had been mentioned in hushed tones, almost a lament, a shadow of regret, clinging to it like mist to a mountain peak. Now, holding this locket, Sophia felt a cold, creeping certainty begin to blossom in her chest, a vine of dread intertwining with the tendrils of a terrifying curiosity. She closed her eyes, tried to conjure her grandmother's face, not as the gentle, silver-haired woman she knew, but as the spirited young woman in the photograph. Her grandmother had spoken, a dialect of Italian that was rich with ancient words, phrases that had felt like forgotten melodies on Sophia's tongue. She had a memory, faint and elusive, of a particular proverb, a snippet of a lullaby, perhaps, that her grandmother would sometimes hum or whisper when she thought Sophia was asleep, a phrase tinged with both sorrow and a fierce, protective love. Sophia's mind, sharp and analytical, sifted through the dusty archives of her memory, pulling at threads, seeking patterns. She knew the regional dialects, the nuances of old Italian customs. She had devoured books, studied linguistics, a passion born from a desire to understand her heritage, a heritage her grandmother had kept carefully veiled. Now that seemingly innocuous hobby felt like a key, forged in fire, to unlock a cage she hadn't known she was trapped inside. She remembered a faint symbol, a stylized lion's head, engraved on the back of the locket, almost imperceptible beneath the wear of decades. It was a symbol she had once seen in an old, leather-bound book of heraldry her grandmother had kept hidden in a locked cedar chest, a book filled with ancient family crests and symbols from a particular region of Sicily, the very region Luciano's family hailed from. The lion, fierce and regal, had a small, almost hidden inscription. Beneath its chin, a series of tiny, almost imperceptible letters. Sophia pulled a small magnifying glass from her bag, one she used for examining old coins she sometimes found. With painstaking slowness, she brought it to bear on the locket, her breath held tight in her lungs. The letters resolved themselves into a word, an old Italian word, one rarely used today, but instantly recognizable too. Sophia, due to her deep dive into obscure dialects, custode, guardian, keeper, and then, beneath it, a sequence of numbers, almost like a date, yet not quite. A code, perhaps. A subtle tremor ran through her. Her mind raced, connecting the fragments. The lion, the word custode, the date-like sequence, and, most chillingly, the uncanny resemblance in the photograph. It wasn't just a resemblance, it was a lineage. The woman in the locket was not merely a relative, she was a direct ancestor. Sophia felt a sudden, dizzying jolt, a profound sense of recognition that transcended simple deduction. The phrase, the lullaby, the proverb that her grandmother had hummed, it resurfaced in her mind, clear as a bell, now laced with an unbearable weight of meaning. It was an old Sicilian saying, one known only to a handful of families from the very specific valley where Luciano's ancestors and Sophia's had originated. It spoke of loyalty, of blood, of secrets kept deep within the earth. Il sang della terra non dimentica, Sophia whispered aloud, the old Italian words feeling heavy on her tongue. The blood of the earth does not forget. It was the same phrase her grandmother had whispered, sometimes with a faraway look in her eyes, sometimes with a fierce, almost desperate hope. But it was also a phrase she had heard Luciano use in a moment of quiet reflection during one of their initial, unsettling conversations, a moment when he had seemed almost vulnerable, hinting at a past steeped in tradition and unspoken oaths. He had used it to punctuate a story about ancestral feuds, a story that had chilled her then, but now froze her blood solid. This was no coincidence. The phrase was a password, a key, a recognition. A wave of profound shock washed over Sophia, so strong it made her stomach churn. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a horrifying finality. Her grandmother's guarded past, the mysterious uncle, the family secrets, all coalesced around this single, potent phrase. The woman in the photograph, the lion crest, the word custode, the shared proverb, they were all threads woven into a tapestry that now revealed a truth too enormous, too terrifying to fully comprehend. Sophia was not merely connected to Luciano's world. She was part of it, woven into its very fabric, perhaps. Even its dark heart. She now realized with a sickening clarity, the daughter or granddaughter of someone intimately known to Don Luciano, someone whose past was deeply intertwined with his own. A lost love, perhaps, whose memory he cherished, but whose lineage he might have tried to erase. Or a respected rival, whose bloodline he now sought to control. Or most chillingly, the descendant of a trusted traitor, whose family he had marked for a unique, insidious form of vengeance. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. Her entrance into Don Luciano's world, her seemingly random employment, her sudden proximity to the very heart of his operations. It was not an accident. It was a calculated move. He had recognized her, or at the very least he had recognized her connection to this profound, ancient secret. He had brought her close, not out of chance, but out of a deliberate, complex, and deeply personal motive. Every glance, every challenging word, every seemingly innocent question he had posed to her, now replayed in her mind. With a sinister, manipulative undertone. He had been testing her, observing her, assessing her. He had known who she was, or at least suspected from the very first day. The entire charade, the humiliating Italian order, her subsequent employment, the slow, agonizing reveal of his dangerous world, it had all been a meticulously orchestrated game. A cruel, elegant game designed to draw her in, to uncover her true self, and perhaps to use her for his own inscrutable ends. A cold, hard anger began to curdle in her gut, slowly replacing the initial shock and fear. It wasn't a hot, impulsive rage, but a chilling, steady fury. She had been manipulated, played like a pawn on a chessboard she hadn't even known existed. Every moment she had spent in his presence, every effort she had made to prove herself, every fear she had swallowed, had been under the gaze of a man who already held the ultimate advantage. He had allowed her to believe she was struggling, fighting her way through a new, dangerous reality, all while holding the strings to her very identity. The sheer audacity, the calculated cruelty of it, made her clench her fists until her nails dug into her palms. The trust she had, against her better judgment, begun to build in him, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about a profound, personal betrayal. Her quiet grandmother, her own forgotten past, had been weaponized against her, used by this powerful, ruthless man to ensnare her. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing down on her, as if the walls themselves were closing in, imbued with the weight of this terrible truth. She was not a victim of circumstance. She was a victim of design. Her breath hitched in her throat, a sharp, ragged sound that echoed in the sudden, profound silence of the room. He knew. He always knew. The words echoed in her mind, a mantra of betrayal. The Italian phrase her grandmother once whispered, now a dark, damning accusation. The initial curiosity that had driven her to examine the locket had curdled into a potent cocktail of fear and righteous indignation. He had watched her, studied her, allowed her to believe she was uncovering secrets, when in truth, he had merely been observing her reaction to the truths he himself had carefully laid out. She was not just a waitress, not just a bright young woman who stumbled into his dangerous orbit. She was a link, a piece of his own past, and he had been waiting for the moment when she would finally connect the dots. The game, as she now understood it, had never been about the pasta. It had always been about her. A sound, a subtle shift in the air, pulled her from her furious reverie. The heavy oak door to the study, which she had thought was securely closed, now stood ajar. A sliver of light from the hallway cut across the floor, and in its edge a shadow lengthened, growing steadily larger, more defined. Don Luciano stood there, framed in the doorway, his silhouette stark against the muted light beyond. He hadn't entered yet, but his presence filled the room, a palpable, suffocating force. His face was unreadable, his eyes, dark and knowing, fixed on her, on the locket still clutched in her hand. There was no surprise in his gaze, no question, only a chilling, quiet understanding. The cat-and-mouse game, played out in the opulent cage of his empire, was indeed over. Don Luciano stepped fully into the room, the heavy doors swinging shut behind him with a soft thud that echoed like a final, irreversible decision in the silence. He didn't speak, didn't move towards her, but merely stood there, his presence alone a crushing weight. The air, already thick with the scent of old paper and polished wood, now felt impossibly heavy, suffocating Sophia with the unspoken truths that hung between them. She clutched the locket tighter, the cold metal digging into her palm, a futile anchor in a sea of revelations. Her gaze, fierce and accusing, met his, searching for any flicker of surprise, any hint of a lie, but found only that same deep, unsettling understanding. There was no game left to play, no mask for him to shed. He had known all along. Every glance, every carefully chosen word, every test had been orchestrated, leading her to this very precipice. Sophia's breath hitched, a wave of incandescent fury washing over her. The humiliation of being a pawn, of having her life meticulously manipulated, burned hotter than any betrayal she had ever imagined. She felt a primal scream bubbling in her throat, but she forced it down, her voice trembling with the effort of control, each word laced with a venom she hadn't known she possessed. You played me. You dragged me into your world because of a ghost from the past. You set this entire charade in motion, watching me, waiting for me to connect the dots, all for some twisted sense of what? Retribution? Nostalgia. Her grip on the locket tightened further, her knuckles white. You tricked me. You made me believe I was smart, discovering things when all along you were simply observing your carefully constructed experiment. Luciano took a slow step forward, then another, his eyes never leaving hers. There was a subtle shift in his expression, a softening around the edges of his usually impenetrable gaze, a flicker of something akin to regret, or perhaps a profound sadness. It was a vulnerability so rare, so fleeting, that Sophia almost missed it, almost dismissed it as another one of his calculated deceptions. Not a ghost, Sophia, he corrected, his voice still quiet, but imbued with a depth of emotion she hadn't heard before. A memory, a legacy, and you are its strongest echo. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the space between them. I did not orchestrate this for humiliation. I did it to honora pramis, to correct a profound error that has haunted me for decades. And yes, he admitted, his eyes holding hers, to see if there was still a chance to reclaim something I thought was irrevocably lost. His confession, delivered with such unexpected candor, momentarily disarmed her. The raw anger that had consumed her began to splinter, making way for a cold, sharp curiosity. What kind of promise? What error? And what could possibly be lost that she, a humble waitress, could somehow reclaim? What are you talking about? She demanded, her voice still sharp, but now tinged with a desperate need for understanding. What does any of this have to do with me? With my grandmother? He walked to a large, antique desk, running a hand over its polished surface before turning back to her. The phrase you spoke that night, he began, his gaze distant now, lost in a past she couldn't see. Un futuro senza limiti, con il coraggio di una leonessa. A future without limits, with the courage of a lioness. It was not a random order, Sophia. It was a testament, a secret language, between two people who believed they could defy the world. It was whispered to me countless times by someone I loved more than life itself, someone who saw the potential for a different path, a path of intellect and strength, not just brute force and tradition. His eyes returned to hers, a startling intensity in their depths. That person was your grandmother's sister, my first love, your great-aunt, Isabella. The revelation hit her like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Isabella, her grandmother's sister, the one whose name was spoken in hushed tones, the one whose portrait hung in the dusty attic, a symbol of a forgotten tragedy. Sophia had known Isabella existed, a vague figure from family lore, but never like this, never as a vibrant, living presence woven into the very fabric of Don Luciano's formidable existence. The world tilted on its axis. The locket, the phrase, her grandmother's quiet grief, it all coalesced into a terrifying, undeniable truth. Isabella, Sophia, whispered, the name a foreign sound on her tongue. She was a part of this world, wasn't she? Your world. Luciano nodded slowly, a shadow of pain crossing his features. She was, and she wanted to change it, to use her mind, her courage, to lead it into a new era. But the world, this world, was not ready for a woman like her. Not then. She paid the ultimate price for her vision, and I was too young, too foolish, too bound by tradition to protect her as I should have. His gaze was heavy, filled with a profound, ancient sorrow. When you spoke those words with her passion, her fire eye, heard her voice again, I saw her spirit reborn. It was an echo of a past I never expected to hear. Again, igniting a flame of both hope and immense guilt within me. Sophia felt a tremor run through her. The anger, though still present, was now mixed with a bewildering cocktail of pity, fear, and a terrifying sense of destiny. She looked down at the locket. The intricately carved lioness, now seeming less like a mere piece of jewelry and more like a family crest, a banner she was now unwittingly forced to bear. Isabella's words, Isabella's courage, Isabella's tragic end. It all converged on her, Sophia, here and now. Don Luciano wasn't just recruiting a bright young woman. He was attempting to resurrect a past, to fulfill a broken promise. Through her, the weight of it was staggering. So, this isn't a job offer, is it? Sophia's voice was barely audible, a raw whisper. This is a coronation. You want me to step into her shoes? Into this kingdom of shadows and blood. The thought was monstrous, terrifying, but a strange, dark current of power also coursed through her veins. The idea of wielding such influence, of using her intellect not just to survive, but to truly shape a world that had once destroyed her kin, was both horrifying and undeniably compelling. Luciano watched her, his expression unreadable once more, allowing her the space to wrestle with the implications. Now, he finally said, his voice regaining its usual steel, the question is what will you do with it? You have a choice, Sophia. Embrace your legacy in this world. Use your intellect, your sharp mind, your innate courage to carve out your own future within it. Not as Isabella, but as Sophia. To change it, perhaps, from the inside, as she had dreamed. To protect those you love with the power that this position affords you. He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. Or you can try to flee, to disappear. But I assure you, Sophia, this world is vast, but its reach is far vaster. And those you seek to protect, your grandmother, would become vulnerable, exposed to dangers far greater than anything you can imagine if you attempt to sever this connection. This world, once it recognizes you, does not let go. His words painted a stark, brutal picture. Fleeing meant placing her beloved grandmother, her only family, in unimaginable peril. It meant running forever, looking over her shoulder, a life defined by fear and regret. Embracing it, however, meant stepping into a role she neither sought nor understood, a role steeped in violence and deception, but one that offered a terrifying semblance of control, a chance to protect what was hers. The air in the opulent study crackled with her internal struggle. She looked at Don Luciano, a man who represented everything she feared, yet who now stood before her, offering a path she couldn't refuse without condemning her own blood. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of fear, anger, and a dawning, icy pragmatism. She had always prided herself on her intelligence, her ability to analyze, to adapt. This was the ultimate test. To protect her grandmother, to truly safeguard their future, she couldn't run. She couldn't hide. She had to understand this world, its intricate rules, its brutal logic. She had to learn to play the game, not as a victim, but as a player, a very dangerous player. The thought sent a chill down her spine, but also a surge of fierce, cold resolve. She would not be another Isabella, sacrificed on the altar of ambition and tradition. She would be Sophia, and she would survive. She would master the rules of Don Luciano's game, and then, perhaps, she would change them. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the decision hardening in her chest. Her eyes met Luciano's, no longer filled with just anger, but with a new, steel-like determination. You want me to step into this world, she said, her voice surprisingly steady now, though still raw with suppressed emotion. You want me to use my mind, to lead. Her gaze flickered to the locket, then back to him. You want me to be the echo of Isabella, but with my own voice. Phoenix. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped her lips. You want a lioness, Don Luciano? You found one. But understand this. A lioness is loyal to her. Pride. And my pride is my family. My grandmother. And if you ever, for 1 second, threaten her, or try to control me beyond what is necessary to protect what is now mine by right of this legacy you bestowed upon me, you will regret it. Do you understand? Luciano's lips curved into something that might have been a ghost of a smile, a flicker of approval. In his dark eyes, he had pushed her, tested her, and she had not broken. She had bent, but only to spring back with greater force. I understand perfectly, Sophia, he said, his voice laced with an undeniable respect. And I expect nothing less. Now, the real game begins. What will you do with this power, this position? What kind of future will you forge? He gestured around the room, to the vast estate beyond, a silent offer of the empire at her feet. Now, what you will do with it? Before Sophia could formulate a response, before she could fully articulate the terrifying, exhilarating path she was about to embark upon, a sudden, violent eruption shattered the stillness of the night. The sharp, unmistakable crack of gunfire ripped through the silence, followed by a cacophony of shouts, screams, and the heavy thud of impacts from somewhere outside the study. The opulent mansion, which moments before had been a gilded cage for her emotional reckoning, suddenly transformed into a fortress under siege. The quiet, contemplative tension that had filled the room was instantly replaced by an urgent, terrifying chaos. Don Luciano's head snapped towards the door, his face instantly hardening, every trace of vulnerability vanishing, replaced by the steely resolve of a warlord. The battle for power, the whispers of legacy, were momentarily forgotten. The fight for survival had just begun. The sharp, unmistakable crack of gunfire ripped through the silence, followed by a cacophony of shouts, screams, and the heavy thud of impacts from somewhere outside the study. The opulent mansion, which moments before had been a gilded cage for her emotional reckoning, suddenly transformed into a fortress under siege. The quiet, contemplative tension that had filled the room was instantly replaced by an urgent, terrifying chaos. Don Luciano's head snapped towards the door, his face instantly hardening, every trace of vulnerability vanishing, replaced by the steely resolve of a warlord. The battle for power, the whispers of legacy, were momentarily forgotten. The fight for survival had just begun. A second volley of shots erupted, closer this time, splintering the heavy oak door that led to the corridor, which shards exploded inwards, followed by the terrifying silhouettes of men wielding automatic weapons, their faces obscured by balaclavas, their eyes glinting with cold intent. The air, instantly filled with the acrid stench of gunpowder, thick and choking, mixing with the scent of old money and fear. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. A primal scream lodged somewhere deep in her chest, refusing to escape. Her carefully constructed composure, the hard-won facade of resilience, shattered in an instant. This was not a test, not a game of words and wit. This was death. Luciano moved with a speed that belied his earlier languor, grabbing Sophia by the arm and yanking her down behind the massive, ornate mahogany desk. The wood groaned under the impact of bullets, splinters flying, each impact a jarring symphony of destruction. The world outside the desk became a blur of motion and violence. Enzo, Luciano's towering head of security, burst into the room, two other bodyguards hot on his heels, their own weapons already drawn and spitting fire. The air vibrated with the continuous roar of automatic weapons, a deafening symphony that stole all other sound, all other thought. Sophia pressed herself against the cold marble floor, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, convinced it would explode from the sheer terror. She could feel the vibrations of the gunfire through the floorboards, through her very bones. Dust motes danced in the chaotic flashes of muzzle fire, turning the once grand study into a scene of apocalyptique destruction. One of Luciano's men, a burly figure Sophia had seen guarding the outer gates, let out a guttural cry. As he stumbled, a dark, blossoming stain appearing on his pristine white shirt. He collapsed, his weapon clattering uselessly to the floor, his eyes wide and unseeing, staring at the gilded ceiling. Despair, cold and sharp, pierced through the red haze of Sophia's terror. This was real. These were lives extinguished in an instant. Enzo roared orders, his voice surprisingly clear amidst the din, attempting to coordinate a defense that felt utterly overwhelmed. The attackers were relentless, pouring into the study, their numbers seemingly endless. They were not here to negotiate. They were here to obliterate. Luciano, pressed beside her, was a coiled spring of tension. His hand, which had been gripping her arm, now held a sleek, black pistol, its weight comforting in the face of such overwhelming odds. He fired with deadly precision, each shot finding its mark, but for every attacker he brought down, another seemed to take its place. The attackers were closing in, their shouts muffled but menacing. Sophia saw the desperation in Luciano's eyes, a flicker of raw, animalistic fear that mirrored her own, but quickly replaced by furious determination. He was a lion, cornered but not broken. "Sophia, get back!" Luciano barked, his voice hoarse, adrenaline coursing through his veins, making his words sharp and urgent. "This is not your place." He pushed her further behind the desk, a protective instinct overriding all else, a desperate attempt to shield her from the carnage. But Sophia, for the first time in her life, refused to be pushed. Her mind, usually so keen and calculating, was a whirlwind of instinct and survival. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it, something else stirred, a furious, desperate resolve. She was not a damsel. She was a survivor. Her eyes darted around the opulent room, searching, assessing, her gaze landing on a massive bronze statue of a charging bull, its hooves poised in mid-air, its weight immense. It was an absurdity, a piece of art in a war zone, yet in that moment it was a weapon. Without thinking, without hesitation, she scrambled from behind the desk, ignoring Luciano's furious glare. "My place is where I can survive, Don," she yelled back, her voice surprisingly steady, cutting through the gunfire and shouts. "And yours, too." She lunged for the statue, her small hands scrabbling for purchase on the cold metal. It was heavy, impossibly heavy, but a surge of adrenaline gave her superhuman strength. She pushed, grunted, pulled, her muscles screaming in protest. The statue began to tilt, slowly at first, then gaining momentum. With a final, desperate shove, she sent the massive bronze bull toppling forward, directly into the path of 3 advancing gunmen. The impact was bone-jarring, a sickening crunch of metal against flesh, a collective cry of pain, followed by the clatter of weapons and the dull thud of bodies hitting the floor. The statue landed, with a deafening crash, momentarily silencing the relentless gunfire in that section of the room. It was a small victory, a momentary reprieve, but it was enough. Luciano, momentarily stunned by her audacity, saw his chance. He seized her arm again, but this time not to push her away, but to pull her close, moving towards a hidden panel behind a large tapestry Sophia hadn't noticed before. "Clever girl," he muttered, a grim, adrenaline-fueled appreciation in his tone, even as he coughed. From the smoke filling the room, he fumbled with a concealed latch, his fingers grazed and bleeding from stray shrapnel. The tapestry swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow passage. More gunfire erupted from behind them, a renewed assault, forcing them forward. They stumbled into the darkness, Luciano pulling her through, the sounds of battle slowly fading, replaced by the pounding of their own hearts, the ragged rhythm of their desperate breathing. The passage was tight, smelling of damp earth and stale air, a stark contrast to the luxurious destruction they had just escaped. They moved in silence, a shared understanding passing between them without words. Every creak, every distant shout, sent a jolt of terror through Sophia. She could feel Luciano's tense muscles. Against her, the warmth of his hand still gripping hers, guiding her through the oppressive darkness. A different kind of fear now, not of the direct, immediate violence, but of the unknown, of the lingering threat that still shadowed them. They emerged into a cold, damp cellar, the air thick with the smell of wine and aging wood. From there, another hidden door, expertly camouflaged into the stone wall, led them outside, into the crisp night air. The world outside was a jarring contrast to the chaos within. The estate grounds were eerily quiet, the sounds of the battle swallowed by the thick walls of the mansion. A light drizzle had begun to fall, washing the dust and smoke from the air, making the world seem momentarily cleansed. Sophia gulped in lungfuls of the cool, damp air, her body trembling uncontrollably. She was alive. They were alive, but not unscathed. Her left arm throbbed, a deep gash from a flying splinter, and a thin line of blood trickled down Luciano's temple, his suit jacket torn, a grim testament to the violence they had just endured. He leaned against a gnarled oak tree, his chest heaving, his face pale and drawn in the dim moonlight. The ruthless warlord had vanished, replaced by a man bruised, bleeding, and profoundly shaken. He looked at Sophia, his dark eyes meeting hers, and for the first time, she saw no pretense, no masks, only raw vulnerability. And something else, a deep, unshakable respect, a bond forged in the crucible of shared terror and survival. They were two broken individuals standing in the aftermath of a storm, both irrevocably changed. Sophia felt the adrenaline slowly draining from her body, leaving her weak and exhausted. The pain in her arm became a dull throb, a constant reminder. Her elegant dress was torn, stained with dirt and blood, her hair disheveled. She looked nothing like the polished, calculating woman who had walked into Luciano's study hours ago. And yet, she felt more herself than ever before. The fear, the fight, the unexpected act of courage, it had stripped away all artifice. She was not just a waitress, not just an opportunist. She was a survivor, a fighter. She had seen the true face of Luciano's world, a world of brutal power and sudden death. And she had not only survived it, she had contributed to their survival. Her old life, the one she had yearned for, the one she had plotted to return to, felt impossibly distant. Now a faint echo from another lifetime. It was gone, irrevocably severed by the events of this night. The innocence, the normalcy, the dream of a quiet existence, they had all been shattered along with the study's door. Her destiny was no longer her own to casually choose. It was now, undeniably, inextricably linked to Luciano's. She understood that with a clarity that was both terrifying and strangely liberating. There was no going back. There was only forward, into the uncertain, dangerous future that awaited them both. The immediate danger had passed, the shouts and gunfire now, just a fading nightmare behind the mansion walls. Sophia looked at Luciano, and he, at her, both changed, both marked, knowing this was merely the violent, explosive beginning of a journey neither of them could have ever foreseen. The silence that settled over the Moretti mansion was heavier than any shout, more suffocating than any gunfire. It pressed down on Sophia, on Luciano, on every shaken soul within those blood-splattered walls. The opulent halls, moments ago a battlefield, now echoed with the hushed urgency of men moving like ghosts, their faces grim, their movements precise. They were assessing the damage, tending to the fallen, their loyalty to the dawn solidified by the very brazenness of the attack. Luciano, his face a mask of weary resolve, leaned heavily on two of his most trusted enforcers as they guided him down the grand staircase. A deep, ugly gash bled sluggishly from his temple, and his left arm hung at an unnatural angle, clearly dislocated or broken, a brutal testament to the ferocity of the assault. Yet, even wounded, his presence commanded. His eyes, though, shadowed with pain, burned with an unyielding fire, a silent promise of retribution that would echo through the city's underworld for generations. The attack had been a calculated blow, precise and devastating, aimed at the very heart of his power, designed to dismantle his authority, to demonstrate his vulnerability. Yet it had failed, and in failing, it had only forged Luciano's resolve into something harder, something more terrifyingly absolute. He had survived, emerging from the crucible of violence not diminished, but consecrated anew, his grip on the reins of his empire, far from weakening, had tightened into an unbreakable hold. The whispers among his men were not of his frailty, but of his invincibility, a myth reinforced by the blood still drying on his marble floors. Sophia watched him, a strange, profound calm settling over her amidst the lingering chaos. Her own body throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, a mosaic of bruises blooming beneath her skin where the elegant dress now hung in tattered shreds, stained with dirt and the faint, coppery scent of blood. But the physical discomfort was a distant hum compared to the profound, irrevocable shift within her. She had faced death, not once, but repeatedly in the last few hours, staring into its cold, indifferent eyes. She had seen the raw, unvarnished truth of this world, a place where life was cheap, where morality was a luxury, and where power was the only currency that mattered. And she had not broken. She had not even flinched. Instead, she had acted, her mind sharp, her instincts honed by a lifetime of quiet observation and an unexpected surge of adrenaline. The fear that had once been a constant companion, a subtle tremor beneath her carefully constructed composure, had vanished, consumed by the inferno of survival. It had been replaced by something new, something formidable, a quiet, unshakable understanding of her own capacity, a fierce, almost terrifying spark of self-possession. The woman who had served coffee and plotted a quiet escape, the girl who had dreamt of a simple life, was gone, irrevocably consumed by the events of this harrowing night. In her place stood someone forged in fire, her eyes reflecting a nascent, formidable power she had never known she possessed, a power that now felt as intrinsic to her as her own heartbeat. Hours later, the mansion hummed with a different kind of energy, one of somber reconstruction and strategic planning. The immediate crisis was over, the dead removed, the injured tended to by grim-faced medics. Sophia, cleaned and dressed and borrowed, oversized clothes that felt alien on her frame, a dark, unadorned silk blouse and trousers that were a subtle nod to the elegance of this world, yet utterly practical, found herself in Luciano's private study, the very room where the siege had been most intense. Bullet holes, though now meticulously patched and painted over by a team of efficient artisans, still faintly marred the opulent wallpaper, a ghost of violence. The shattered glass had been swept away, replaced by newly polished surfaces, but a faint metallic scent of disinfectants still mingled with the lingering smell of gunpowder, a constant reminder. Luciano, now attended by a private doctor who meticulously reset his dislocated arm and stitched the gash on his temple, sat heavily in his revered leather chair, his injured arm now encased in a rigid sling. He looked at her, his gaze intense, assessing, stripped entirely of the condescension and veiled amusement that had once colored his perception of her. The ice in his eyes had not melted, but it had shifted, revealing a deeper layer of something akin to profound respect, an acknowledgement of a peer forged in the same crucible of extreme pressure. The words resonated deep within Sophia, settling into her bones with a chilling clarity. Amoretti, the name, once a symbol of her grandmother's forgotten past and her own hidden heritage, now held a new, potent meaning, infused with the violence and power of the night. It was an invitation, yes, but also a challenge, a recognition of her blood, certainly, but more importantly of her actions, her courage, her unexpected resilience. She met his gaze, her chin held high, the ghost of a defiant, knowing smile playing on her lips. Her heart, which had pounded with raw terror just hours before, now beat with a steady, unwavering rhythm. "I am Sophia," she replied, her voice steady, clear, imbued with a newfound strength that surprised even herself, a timbre that spoke of conviction. "And if this is my place, Don, then we will play by my rules too." A flicker of something unreadable crossed Luciano's face. Surprise, perhaps, or grudging. Admiration that he struggled to contain. He didn't respond immediately, his dark eyes probing hers, searching for any hint of weakness or bluff, any wavering in her conviction. But there was none, only unwavering resolve, a steel core beneath the elegant facade. He saw not a frightened girl, nor merely a clever opportunist, but a woman who had seen the abyss of his world and walked away not just stronger, but profoundly changed, her moral compass, though tested by the darkest of nights, still spinning true to an internal north. He recognized the same fierce independence that had defined his own rise to power, the same strategic mind, albeit tempered by a different kind of strength, one rooted in empathy, in observation, and in an unyielding sense of justice, even within this often unjust world. He saw her quick mind, her ability to analyze complex situations, to adapt instantly, led by quiet example. The way she had navigated the chaos, thinking steps ahead, anticipating threats, protecting those around her, including himself, with a blend of courage and intellect. She was not just a survivor, she was a strategist, an invaluable asset, a nascent force that could potentially reshape his entire organization. The offer, once a veiled threat that had propelled her into his orbit, had now transformed into a genuine, respectful proposition. Luciano, a man who had built an empire on calculated risks, unwavering loyalty, and brutal efficiency, found himself contemplating a future where Sophia was not just an acquaintance, not just a pawn in his intricate game of power, but a crucial piece, perhaps, even a queen in her own right. The thought of a successor, a true inheritor of his complex legacy, had always been a distant, abstract concept, often clouded by the absence of a son or a trusted blood relative capable of wielding such immense power. But now, looking at Sophia, he saw a viable path, however unconventional, that might secure the future of the Moretti family far beyond his own years, ensuring its survival and continued dominance. She understood the intricate dance of this world, not merely through brutal, hands-on experience, but through an innate intelligence, a quiet cunning that mirrored his own, yet was distinctly her own, infused with a different perspective. He accepted her conditions, not out of weakness, but out of a profound, pragmatic understanding of her unique value. Her rules, her moral framework, would become their rules, at least in part, shaping the family's future in ways he couldn't yet fully grasp, but intuitively knew would be transformative. With the immediate dangers contained and the future of the family tentatively plotted, Sophia sought a moment of quiet, a necessary respite from the swirling tempest of her new life. She needed to see her grandmother. The thought of Nana Elena, frail and recovering in the sterile confines of the hospital, had been a sharp, poignant counterpoint to the raw violence of the night, a stark reminder of the life she had once desperately clung to and the fragile, precious connections that still bound her to it. dressed in clothes provided by one of Luciano's women, clothes that were surprisingly chic and understated, a dark wool coat over a simple, elegant dress, a stark contrast to her previous life of worn uniforms. Sophia was driven to the hospital in a black sedan, the tinted windows shielding her from the curious glances of the outside world, from the life she had left behind. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic, stale coffee, and the faint, sweet scent of lilies, a familiar aroma that now felt strangely alien, almost suffocating after the incense, old leather, and lingering gunpowder of the Moretti estate. Her grandmother, Nana Elena, lay in her hospital bed, looking smaller, more vulnerable than Sophia remembered, the crisp white sheets a stark contrast to her age-worn skin. But her eyes, though still clouded with fatigue, held a spark of recognition, a faint, almost beatific smile gracing her lips as Sophia approached. "Sophia, my little bird Nana," Elena whispered, her voice still weak, but clear, filled with a love that transcended the sterile environment. "You came. I knew you would." Sophia gripped her grandmother's hand, the rough, callous skin a comforting anchor in the turbulent sea of her new reality. A wave of profound, overwhelming relief washed over her, mingled with a bittersweet, aching sorrow. Nana Elena was recovering, slowly but surely. The critical phase had passed. The fragile thread of her life had held. This precious life, the one Sophia had fought so hard to protect. The reason she had stepped onto this dangerous path was safe. For now. And in that moment, a chilling, undeniable realization solidified within her. Her path, the dangerous, uncertain road she had chosen, or perhaps that had chosen her, was the only way. It was the only means by which she could truly ensure Nana Elena's safety, to shield her from the harsh, predatory realities of a world that threatened to swallow them whole. The quiet life, the one she had dreamed of for so long, the one she had tried to regain, offered no such protection. It offered only vulnerability, a constant, nagging fear. But this new power, this new position she was stepping into, came at a cost. A heavy, immeasurable cost that would weigh on her soul. The innocent Sophia, the one who dreamed of art and quiet evenings, was gone, irrevocably transformed. She had traded her innocence for influence, her peace for protection, her freedom for a gilded cage. However much she might try to reshape its ornate bars, there would be blood on her hands, if not directly spilled by her own volition, then indirectly through the actions of those she now commanded. There would be choices that would haunt her, nightmares, compromises that would chip away at her soul, sacrifices that would leave indelible scars. There would be a perpetual vigilance, a constant awareness of the shadows that lurked at the edges of this world, a world she was now inextricably part of. She looked at her grandmother, her heart swelling with a fierce, protective love, a love so potent it bordered on pain, and knew she would pay any price. The quiet desperation that had driven her before had transformed into a steely, unyielding resolve. The cost was immense, but the alternative was unbearable. Back at the mansion, the air was still heavy, but with anticipation rather than lingering dread. Luciano sat in his study, the room now meticulously cleaned, the bullet holes patched and painted, the shattered glass replaced by shimmering new panes. It was a space rebuilt, a symbol of resilience. Just as the Moretti family was being rebuilt, stronger perhaps, from the brutal assault. Sophia entered, not with the hesitant steps of a tentative guest, nor the forced confidence of an impostor, but with the quiet, inherent assuredness of someone who truly belonged, someone who had claimed her place. She walked towards Luciano, stopping not behind him, not subserviently, but to his side as an equal, a partner in the uncertain, dangerous dance of power and survival. Her attire, though still technically borrowed, had been tailored to fit her perfectly in the intervening Ours, a dark, elegant dress of Italian design that spoke of quiet authority and understated sophistication. Her hair, no longer disheveled or utilitarian, was swept back in a graceful, severe style, framing a face that was strikingly beautiful, but now etched with deeper lines of experience and a profound, undeniable gravitas. Her eyes, those intelligent, watchful eyes that had once held fear and a yearning for escape, now reflected a complex tapestry of emotions, the hard-won wisdom, earned through fire, the unwavering determination to carve her own path within this brutal world, and a new, almost unsettling type of power that radiated from her, subtle yet utterly undeniable. Luciano looked at her, his expression unreadable to anyone else, but Sophia saw the faint, almost imperceptible nod that acknowledged their unspoken agreement, a silent pact forged in blood and survival. The man who had frozen in the restaurant, momentarily captivated by a waitress speaking Italian, had been irrevocably altered by that singular, unexpected encounter. That moment of unexpected vulnerability, that instant of recognition across a chasm of class and expectation, had been the initial catalyst. It had unleashed a chain of events that had shattered his comfortable, predictable world, yes, but also opened it to a possibility he had never imagined, a future far more complex and enduring. Sophia, the unexpected variable, the humble waitress, had become the essential constant, the unlooked-for key to his legacy. She was no longer just the woman who understood his language, but the woman who understood his world, and who, in her own unique way, could now shape it, mold it, perhaps even lead it into a new, formidable era. The city lights twinkled outside the study window, a glittering expanse of ambition, danger, and untold stories. The future remained a treacherous, winding road, full of unseen turns and hidden precipices demanding constant vigilance. But as Sophia stood by Luciano's side, a silent, formidable presence, she was ready. She was no longer merely surviving. She was poised to thrive, to command, to protect, armed with a power she had never sought, but now wielded with fierce, quiet conviction. Her destiny, once dictated by circumstance, was now firmly in her grasp, a legacy, forged not only in blood, but in the crucible of a simple phrase spoken in Italian, the innocent, unwitting beginning to a dangerous, powerful new era. The waitress who ordered in Italian to humiliate a boss had frozen a Mafia dawn, only to thaw a new path for herself, and for him a path, paved with both peril and unprecedented influence. The sun was rising on a new, dangerous dawn, and Sophia, the Moretti, stood ready to meet it, her eyes reflecting the twilight glow of an empire, both old and new, forever changed.